Come on through, please have a seat. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you spent some time with a new friend and got acquainted with some old ones. This is a great event to network. It's my honor to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is one where I went to a conference put on by the makers of Crucial Conversations. And in their conference, very similar to this, where they get a lot of their users and customers together, they had brought our speaker in. And I was going through a time and a place in my life where just bombarded left and right. Hey, you should do this, you should do this, you should take on this. The consulting management team should be doing this. And there was this bombardment, both professionally and personally. And I was kind of to a place where I needed some guidance. And what I heard from our speaker was that guidance that made an impact. It was almost magical in what I heard. And it's allowed me to make better decisions after that. So as a services meeting, the committee meeting for this event, we started to think about how do we share that message. And so we've decided to invite here, and we have here this afternoon, Greg McKeown, who is the New York Times best-selling author of a book called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. So please join me and welcome Greg McKeown to the stage, Essentialism.
Thank you, Justin. Well, it's awfully good to be with you. Are you having a good conference? This is a good group of people. I was thinking, it's interesting being an Englishman in Washington, D.C. Do we have any Englishmen here? Do we have any Englishmen? I love that they didn't make one sound. Watch this. Anyone from Texas? Yeah! That's the difference. That's the difference. But it's not a pride difference. It's just a noise difference. I was thinking about this. No, being here in Washington, D.C. was very interesting. I thought about, because it always reminds me, it's a little ways back, not too far now, July 4th, being an Englishman on July 4th in America is always an interesting experience. Someone always has to say something. Well, what are they saying in England today? Nothing. That's what they're saying. Nothing. That's what's going on. Nobody notes it. Nobody sees it. Nothing. And then, of course, I feel obligated. To give them a little history lesson. You see, yes. Because, you see, for all of you that have studied your American history, you will know that in the early days of, it wasn't a war of independence in the early days. Did you know this? This is true. This is true. It wasn't a war of independence. It was a civil war. Did you know this? Yes, it was a civil war. This is Common Sense was written at first. They didn't say who wrote it. By an Englishman. Yes, it was a civil war. It was Englishman against Englishman, which, if you will, just follow the logic with me, means that whichever way you look at it, the English won. And what a fine job we've been making of it ever since. I was thinking about the journey that led from England to being here today, and I don't mean the flight and so on. I mean, it's almost a 20-year journey since I was staring at a piece of paper in my hands where I'd been trying to answer a question for 20 minutes. The question was, what would you do if you could do anything? Yeah, we got a design session. What would you do if you could do anything? Because someone had just said, if you do decide to stay in America, which I wasn't even thinking of, but if you do decide to do that, then you should come and do whatever. And I thought, well, what if you didn't do what you've been doing before? Like, what if you just, really thought and explored all your options? What would you do? And when I looked at what I'd written down, all my answers to that question, I was struck not by what I'd written down, but what was missing on the list. I noticed going to law school was not on my list, which was inconvenient because I was already at law school in England. And I thought, well, okay, what if I didn't do that? And then I thought, I better call my parents. So I called the 15-digit number back to England. My mother answers the phone, fortunately. She listens for a while. She says, I think you better talk to Dad. Now, he comes on the phone. Now, put yourself in his position for a moment. What would you say? What would you say to your son? He's calling you from halfway around the world. He's on some whim. He's thinking law school's out after all this time, all this money, all this effort. What would you say? Don't be shy. What would you say? You're crazy. You're crazy. Do we have a microphone? Can somebody give this good father of mine a microphone? What's your name? Jamie. It will be on, I think. It's not on yet, but it will be.
Right.
I trust. Okay, Jamie is your name, and you are from?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
You're from England? All right. So you're from England now. Okay, I said, thinking about quitting law school, you're my dad, you say?
You're crazy.
Thank you, Dad. Why am I crazy?
Because you can't just pick everything up that you've done and just leave it. You've got an investment in it.
So if I'm doing something, but it's the wrong thing, I should just keep investing in it. Is that what you're saying, Dad?
It sounds like that. Yeah, it definitely sounds like that.
It sounds like that.
But how do you know it's wrong?
I can sense there's something much better.
Well, you're very young in your life right now, and there are just things that you have to do. So you still have a lot of viable years to live, and you need to have some sense of responsibility. And you have to finish this task that you started.
Thank you, Dad. Give Jamie a round of applause. My father listened, which, as you can tell, is not entirely like him. He listened, and he became quite Churchillian about the whole thing. Son, you know what we've always told you. Parenthetically, what do you think that he thinks he's always told me? Do what you want. Do what you want, yeah. No, he said go to law school. But he too seemed to forget that in this moment. What we've always told you, son. Because all Englishmen quote Shakespeare over tea and crumpets for breakfast in the morning. He pulls this line straight out of Hamlet. Son, to thine own self be true. What we've always told you. Now, he had never in his entire life said that to me. But somehow he thought that had been the thing. All right, so it led to law school's out. Good, why does that matter? Well, there's a seed in that story for everything that's followed. It led to marvelous things. It led to marrying my wife, staying in America, having children. It led to writing. It led to teaching. That's what I wanted to do on that piece of paper. It led to a marvelous new life. But that's not really the reason I'm sharing it. The reason I'm sharing it is because out of that exercise and the ideas on that page grew a question. That question has been particularly fascinating to me, one that I have pursued now almost these 20 years. I'm going to put that question to you in just a moment, but first I want to ask a preliminary question, which is easier, which is this. Any runners in the room, by a show of hands? Any runners? Have any runners? I love it when people answer this question. They do it like this. They're like, well, it's like, I've heard of the concept, and I have done it occasionally. Okay, so there were some good hands, but I always think it's a little awkward for the rest of us that don't put our hands up, because it's like, I probably should be. It can't be that hard. You don't really need any equipment. It's a bit like, when you go to the doctors, and they have you fill out the information. Somehow when I go to the doctors, I'm always filling out the same information. And they have a series of questions, and one of the questions is, how many days a week do you exercise? You know that moment? And you think, can I really put 0 to 1? Is this where we are now? And then the next question is inevitably, how many days a week do you drink? And I think people think I can't put a larger number to that than to that. So anyway, we had some runners here. We had a runner here. You're a runner. What's your name? Casey. Did I say it right? Casey, if you and I were to have a race and you won the race, which you would, and let's say you won decisively. I mean, you were, for example, let's say you're 50 yards ahead of me at the end of the first race, right? We race a second time, and you get to start the second race 50 yards ahead of me. And in the second race, you win by an additional 50 yards. Does it still make sense? Yes. You're being given a microphone, which is just what you wanted.
I'm following.
You're following. You are now how many yards ahead of me at the beginning of the third race?
Would it be 150? 50 plus 50, another 50? Maybe I wasn't following.
Anybody? What's your job right now?
It used to be. No.
It used to be. Yeah. What did it used to be?
I work for the enablement group.
The what?
Enablement group.
The enablement group. Yeah.
With math.
They probably expect you to know basic math.
That's right.
What's that? Supposed to get answers for the consultants. You give the data to the consultants. Yeah.
150.
We see 150. The answer. Tell them the answer. 100. Because it's the start of the second race. Right?
Oh, I was going the third.
Yeah. That's all right. It's all right. That's all right.
I keep beating you by 50.
So here's another question. You can all help him out again. So what's the chance with a 100-yard advantage in that third race, right? He's going to win the third race. Approximate percentage chance the case is going to win the third race. Just shout it out. I heard like a whole group of people here say 100. Just like that. You said it, didn't you? You already said it, didn't you? That's very rude. I mean, somebody else said, I love it. Somebody else was like, no. And they said 99%, which is not a lot better. I mean, 100% means there is no scenario whatsoever in which I could win. That's what you said, isn't it? Yes, he said very, very sheepishly, he's like, yes. You out. It's not rude. He's not being rude. It's clearly what would happen. That's what will happen. That's why 100. Of course, that's what's going to happen. Now, to the question that has kept me up at night all these years, you'll see the connection to that little story. It's this: why is it that otherwise successful people and companies don't continue to be successful? Why don't they break through to the next level of success? Why don't they continue for a long time? Why doesn't that happen? You see, it should happen. You didn't say 95%. Actually, almost everyone who answered at least the first time around said 100. You weren't alone. You didn't say probability is. You didn't say it's likely. You said it's certain. That's what will happen. And yet when you look at the data, that isn't what happens. And that's why it's so interesting to me. And so now, having put that question to you rhetorically, I put it to you actually. I want your answers, you see. Why is it that otherwise successful people and companies don't continue to be successful? Why not? Okay, here, hands up so I can see who's speaking. Go. They don't change. So the environment changes and they don't change. Good. More. Hands up so we can see you. Okay, a hand here and microphones are coming to you, I think. Okay, the microphone's coming. We're going to have a hand in the back. I should probably give a hand here because that's where the microphone is. Complacency. You both say complacency. There we go. You're so far ahead, you say there's no need. We're not hungry anymore. We're not hungry like we used to be. Good, that could be why. More. Why? Basic. Who said that? That's a little personal there, wasn't it? Why else? Burnout. Go.
They run out of competition until it's too late.
They don't have competition? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they're too far ahead, but then when it's too late...
No, if you've got the microphone, you have to use it.
Sorry. They have competition. They don't have competition, but then when they do, they're too far behind. They get caught out. Like with so many major companies that are so far ahead, but then all of a sudden they completely drop.
But it's built in a complacency idea still, I think, what you're saying. So somebody else turns up, they're so hungry. And maybe the front runner is running not to lose rather than running to win still. Yeah. The other person knows they're trying to win. They've got some clear objective. I'm going to beat that winner. I'm going to catch up. Yes, I like this. These are all good answers. More. They don't focus on priorities. Did you read ahead? You can't save yourself now for saying 100%. That won't do. Well, there was another answer behind.
No, they don't focus on what makes them successful.
Yeah, they don't focus on... Why would they not focus? What you said was they don't focus on what led them to success, but why would they do that? They get distracted. Yeah, that's the gist of it, isn't it? I noticed a pattern working with companies in Silicon Valley, and I bet you've noticed the same pattern, even if you haven't named it. And this is the pattern. In the early days of the company, you had a small group of people focused on just the right problem at the right time. So it was a stage of clarity. Phase 1, clarity. What's phase 1? Clarity. Clarity is so powerful. It's not just correlated, there's a causal relationship with phase 2. Phase 2 is success. That when you have a group of people aligned and unified on just the right idea at just the right time, it leads to success. So phase 2 is what? Success. Yeah. Clarity leads to success. And the question we ought to ask is, what does success lead to? Complacency, I like that. We got an answer here. Now, you're talking hypothetically, aren't you? You don't mean anywhere here. You mean just in general this could happen. Phase 3, before we get even to complacency, phase 3 is that there's a massive increase of options and opportunities. A huge... Does that make sense? If you're successful, what increases might you see? What options and opportunities would expand? Tell me. Okay, they could become hungry again. Yeah, go ahead. Money. You've got more money. What does more money allow you to do? Buy what you want. Spend it. Yes. Spend it on what? You can upgrade all of your products. You can invest in new products. You could have whole new teams going after lots of different new products. You could acquire other companies. And I'm not saying any of these, do these sound like a bad thing to you? And this is the right problem to have. The right problem to have. I mean, you could certainly hire more people. You could hire fast too. I mean, all of these things sound like the right problem to have. This is what companies want to have to deal with. But they do, in fact, turn out to be a problem if it leads to what Jim Collins has called the undisciplined pursuit of more. The undisciplined pursuit of more. If you had to put the undisciplined pursuit of more into your own language and you had one word, what word would you choose? What does that mean to you? The undisciplined pursuit of more. Noise, waste, greed. Right, you've got the idea. And so what happens to companies and individuals? What happens to these Silicon Valley companies that fall into the undisciplined pursuit of more? What happens next is that they start to plateau in their progress or even fail altogether. Can you think of companies in Silicon Valley or elsewhere that have fallen into the pattern we just described? Can you think, if you can, hand up so I can see what you got? BlackBerry, terrific example. I remember being in Canada, I was saying, put away your smartphones, or if you're using a BlackBerry, a not-so-smart phone. They didn't think that was very funny. And yet, this is what happened to BlackBerry. They thought, were they a success story? Of course they were. Of course they were. On almost every single attribute of business success. And yet, at the very moment, at their height, they were, in fact, the most vulnerable. The height of success was their most vulnerable place. Success, it turns out, can be a very vulnerable place. Go. GE. Who thought that this is going to happen to them? Under Jack, we thought this juggernaut. And here we are, really relatively, just a few years later, struggling immensely. More. HP. HP, Yahoo hurts us all. It's personal for us, you know? We just somehow want, for reasons nothing to do with business or the technology environment, for it to come back. You know, we want that. Who wants that? Everybody, we want that for some reason, but we don't use it. We just want it. And this is part of the challenge. I mean, Yahoo, we can riff on them for a second, right? Yahoo, they created the consumer web. I mean, they created the consumer web. They are the beginners. What was the problem? Was it success? No. Well, yes and no. They became successful. Did they have smart people? Yes. They just created everything. And so when somebody comes along, let's say Google, and just focuses on one of their services, suddenly they can't keep up and continue to distinguish themselves. And this is a real challenge. Somebody else said HP. Is HP not a problem? Isn't this just what we've seen? I mean, Bill Packard in the early days repeated something so often inside of the company that it became known as Packard's Law. Packard's Law was this: a successful venture is more likely to die from indigestion than starvation. And you know, it's sort of funny, but it's sort of not, at least for HP, because isn't that exactly what has happened? They have continued to expand and expand. Why? Well, we can. We can do it. We can build anything and everything. We can operate on in all areas, to the point eventually where, you know, you see, well, what are we going to do? I don't know what to do. We better get rid of 40,000 people. We're going to cut the company in half. I mean, this is the equivalent, the organizational equivalent of like quadruple bypass heart surgery. You know, this is like, it sends that organization into cardiac arrest almost. It's just absolutely massively disruptive to the culture and institution. Or, and what else can you do? Is there an alternative? Is there something else you can do? Or do you just have to wait until we get here? Actually, I'm going to say it boldly this way. There really are only two options to get out of this paradox of success that we're describing. Just two. You can either fail, right? Like Blockbuster is now a lot simpler than they used to be. So failure, or the threat of failure, is one, what we'll call strategy one, for getting out of the success paradox. And the second, and the only other that I know of, is to have a leaders act upon the problem before they have to. That is to install a mindset and approach of leadership that simplifies and gets you back to essentials before you have to do that. I mean, when you have to do it, that's the worst time to do it. That's when you're going to lay off 40,000 people and cut the company in half and do all this stuff and try and, I mean, that's what will happen to any successful venture eventually, to try and survive again. So what do you do before, while you're healthy, while you're running lean, just like I understand the Guidewire you are? I mean, that's what it seems like. But how do you do it now before you have that problem? That's the challenge. It's how to, you see, if really, it's this. It's to ask yourself, how do we act upon the problem of the undisciplined pursuit of more and choose the few things, in this case I'm sort of over-exaggerating it, I suppose, to say one thing, but it isn't really one thing, it's just less but better. How can we choose less but better before we have to? Does that make sense? That's the question. How can we become, if I had to put it this way, how do we become essentialists? so that before we have to introduce a language and a logic and a conversation about what is the most important thing we should be focused on, to discuss that internally, even to discuss it with clients, to push back where it makes sense to push back. Any comments or questions when you look at this? Any comments or questions? I'll take them. Go. It sounds like the microphone's coming to you. Yeah, okay, go. Here we go. I'll take any discussion from anybody about this. I want you to think about the graphic here.
I interpreted it as start fresh.
You see this as start fresh.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. What would that look like for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, my personal experience, whenever I have a new assignment, I kind of leave aside what I have done, what I have accomplished until then, start fresh, start learning new. It's like, okay, this is the first time I'm doing anything new.
So there's an advantage when you maybe have a job shift or a position shift that you can go, okay, try and clear the deck. Let's begin again. To what? What would you do? What's the beginning? What would you do at the new beginning?
So first thing is learning, right?
Okay.
Understand what the new set of challenges are, what is that I'm lacking, and start filling those gaps.
Yeah, I like that. The idea of a fresh start. It makes me think of Steve Jobs when he came back to Apple, and one of the first things he said is like, we're not going to look at our past successes anymore. Like, and he took them all, right, takes all the literal, like they had a little museum at Apple headquarters of all their past successes. Of course, he'd been part of most of them. And he said, no, we're going to take them, we're going to give them to a museum, an actual museum, because we've got to be thinking about what's next. So starting with a fresh perspective. And I think I want to encourage the idea that we ought to be asking the question, what is essential next? What is the next big thing? Where are we going? Not, what have we done in the past, and we're just going to keep expanding these versions of what we've done in the past. Good, I like this. More. What are your thoughts or questions when you look at this image? Go.
What if that's the wrong thing?
What if that's the wrong thing? That's what you think about. Okay, now you've done it.
How do I know this is the right thing? Or what if it is the wrong thing, like BlackBerry?
Yeah, darn it. I never thought of that. you might call it the Kodak problem.
Kodak, yeah.
The Kodak problem, right? They're so focused on one thing. They're so like, this is what we do, that they don't even see the digital camera revolution coming. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I gave you that example, didn't I? I mean, that wasn't very good from a persuasion point of view. You said BlackBerry, I know, we'd already kind of done BlackBerry, but let's just riff on Kodak for a second about this, because Kodak's really interesting. This really isn't Kodak. Kodak came up with the next technology. They were the ones that invented digital photography. Did you know that? Did you know that? Yeah. So they were the ones who created the next big thing. Why couldn't they execute on it? What wasn't happening? I think you're right. They didn't refresh. They didn't get to start again. What do we know now? What would we do if we were starting today? Fresh. This is, I think, the important idea. Now, having introduced Kodak, I want to now answer your question directly. What if it's the wrong thing? Well, what's the alternative? Maybe it is the wrong thing. What should you do instead?
Well,
Someone said the right thing.
Well, I think of like Amazon. Amazon is trying like hundreds of different things, right? And they fail. They fail a lot, but they succeed a lot.
Right. And then what?
They rule the world.
All right, let's do this to answer your question. The antidote to the problem of the undisciplined pursuit of more is the disciplined pursuit of less but better. There are 3 stages to it. Three practices of what it means to be an essentialist. Phase 1 is to explore broadly. In fact, what I found in the research is that essentialists explore more broadly than non-essentialists. That's a paradox, but it's true. Essentialists are, in the spirit of refreshing, are going, okay, I'm going to create space to look at all the options. I'm looking broadly, deeply. I'm exploring. I have space to try things out, to explore, so that I can find amidst all of this the next thing. So this is the pattern, is that they explore more but commit to less. A way that it was described to me recently, and I thought beautifully, by someone who studied what differentiates the top performers in an organization from the good performers. Basically, a good to great study, 5,000 employees looking for what distinguishes great from good. He found the number one difference was a principle he described as first less, then obsess. The first thing to do is to create space, to explore broadly, to think broadly, to ask questions, to keep going, and then to develop deeper understanding of those options, still not committing, until eventually you find something and you say, this is it, I really understand these options as well as I can, and so we're making an educated, discerning bet on something big. Now, if you just go back to that slide before for a second, if you go to here and you just say, well, I'm going to randomly pick an option and go big on it, yeah, that doesn't seem like a good strategy to me. I wouldn't do that. But that's not your only option. The idea, sometimes, in fact, a very great deal of sometimes, I think people and leaders choose this because they aren't thinking deeply. Because they don't know, they don't understand what's really happening. So they just go, well, I guess we'll do everything everyone's doing, Is our competitor doing it? Well, we're doing it. Oh, they're investing in that? We'll do that too. And that's instead of understanding deeply what we are trying to do. The essentialist begins as a journalist who is trying to get to the news, trying to get deep into the issue, trying to ask the hard questions till they find and discover what is essential, what is the big bet. We could liken this to I don't know, we mentioned Apple before, maybe it's a little overdone as an example, but you can think when Steve comes back, right, they have 330 products. He reduces it to 10. That's pretty significant. Did you just do it randomly? No, of course not. Thoughtfully, one by one, which of these things we eliminating? And then what are we going to do instead? They develop, interestingly enough, and it wasn't immediately after the Renaissance had already begun, but then they were developing the iPad before the iPhone. This is an important decision, right? This is a perfect illustration of what we're talking about here. You start working on the iPad, and you start saying, the iPhone is really probably a big deal. And then what would most companies do, most non-essentialist cultures? Their strategy would be, let's do both. They're both good. I don't know which it'll be, let's do both. No, they kept on debating, kept on discussing, kept on understanding until they had a very clear, strong, unified point of view. It's not the iPad first, we've got to do the iPhone first. And they stopped work on the iPad, put it aside, put it away, and worked on the iPhone. We know that's the most important decision they made in their Renaissance, right? Even today, it's still, they're an iPhone company still. Obviously they don't want to be forever, but that was a key, critical trade-off. And it's a good illustration of the second point, that the second principle of how to be an essentialist is to eliminate the non-essentials, to actually make trade-offs between two really good options, to not just go, well, it's good, let's do it. We get deep understanding, we identify the big thing, and we go after it for a long time. First, less, then obsess. So the second principle is actually to eliminate, to not just do everything that's good. And the third idea is to execute, but there's a little more to that, which is a non-essentialist will tend to try and force execution at the last moment. It's to pull the all-nighters, hammer it home, make it work. Whereas in the essentialist, wherever possible, taking the resources they've saved in elimination and putting it into a system and a routine that makes it as effortless as possible to execute on what matters most. And of course, this is a cycle, and that's important too, a disciplined pursuit, in fact. So instead of the undisciplined pursuit of more, it's the disciplined pursuit of less, but better. It has just absolutely everything to do with your closet. Nobody thought I was going to a closet just then, did you? There was no transition to closet there. Do we have anybody here who has a show of hands, who here has a closet that's meticulous, beautiful? There was one hand that went up like this. You're it, aren't you? And then there's other people here who know their closets are in trouble. Does anyone here have a closet that looks like the undisciplined pursuit of more? Put your hand up for that. Put your hand up for that. My dad put her hand up for this. Is there any of you that just put your hand up that you go, I really wish it was different, but it never changes, but I wish it was different? Put your hand up if you're that person. Okay. Here we go. We've got you here. What's your name? Tim. Tim, will you help us with something? Sure. He really wishes he had not put his hand up now. Tim, describe your closet to us, will you?
Got a bunch of shirts and pants and stuff. Somewhat organized, but, not greatly organized.
It's not good order. Is it all jammed in?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's tightly in there.
What's that?
It's tightly in there.
It's tightly in there.
Yeah.
Do you have a significant other that...
Yeah, so she takes up more space than I do.
She takes up more space than you do? This is an intervention for you and her. The whole conference is a facade. It's just for you and her right now. Okay, so what's the problem? And have you ever gone in there? Have you gone into your closet at any point and said, look, I'm going to eliminate something. I'm going to take something off the shelf. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done that moment where you take something out as if to give it away? As if to go, do I really? And then something sort of mysterious and magical seems to happen where you go, well, I might wear it again in the future sometime. Has this happened to you?
Yes.
What do you do with that item of clothing?
Just leave it in there.
Yeah, I love it. Doesn't even come out. It says like stay. I'll just leave it. We'll come back to it. Right. Good. I can imagine this situation. What you're doing in this moment is you're using the world's broadest criteria. Did you catch the criteria, everybody? I might use it somewhere in the future, someday. What's the answer to that question? 99%. 100%. It's got to be a yes. You might. You have to say, no, you hold it. No, you hold it. Oh, you've got a comment. My goodness, no, Megan has something to say. No, Megan, we want to hear what you had to say. No. You're running the, is that right? Okay. Megan's like, don't talk to me.
She was trying to steal my thunder.
What's that?
She was trying to steal my thunder.
She's trying to steal, yeah, that's it. We want you to keep it. We want the pressure on you here for a little longer. So, tell me your name again.
Tim.
We're going to help Tim reduce what's in his closet. Can you help with that? And you're going to help him by asking a more selective question, a less but better question, right? That would help him to reduce the items in his closet. Instead of, could you ever maybe use this in the future again, what can he ask? What should he ask? Have you, oh my goodness. He said this, which I've heard before, but he ended it differently. He said, have you worn it in the last, most times people say like in the last year, in the last 6 months. He said, in the last 2 weeks. All right. I wasn't imagining that, but we're going to go there. If you ask that question of all the items in your closet, what percentage would you be down to?
50% maybe.
50%?
Maybe 40. I don't know.
You've worn 50% of your clothes in the last 2 weeks?
Oh, in 2 weeks. I thought you said a year. My bad. 2 weeks? Maybe.
I'm like, this is amazing. You're like my children changing clothes 5 times a day.
Oh, that case, 10%.
You're down to 10% now. I know it was a little confusing. I understand. That's on me. First the math, then I don't know what it is with the numbers in this room. So you're down to 10%. I mean, that's kind of a mission accomplished in one question. Now, we're not actually talking about closets. All evidence to the contrary. We're talking about the closet of our lives, of our leadership. So help me make the transition. Don't give me another question about closets. Give me now a question we could ask ourselves to identify the essential opportunities from the non-essential ones, the vital few from the trivial many. What questions could you ask? Go.
Does it contribute to your stated goals for some amount of time?
Does it contribute to your... In fact, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do something. We're going to do another... Is there anybody here whose life feels like Tim's closet? Any hands up for that? Everyone's like, I'm not putting my hand up for this. I know what happens here. Does he think I'm stupid? What? Hands up. No, do it. I saw some bold people. Okay. Who? Here? You're Toby singled you out? That's not a great moment. So, this problem is so bad that somebody else is like, it's her.
But I was thinking you didn't ask the essential question of when you're looking at your closet. Does it fit?
Tim, don't take it personally. She means generally speaking.
Yes.
So you're right, there's lots of questions you could ask about a closet, but we're now trying to shift beyond the closet to your life, in fact.
Yes.
Describe it to us. Do you feel... Let's ask you this question. In fact, I'm going to ask everyone the question, but I want you to answer too. I want to take a snap poll about like the closet problem, right? Do you feel like those overpacked closets that your life is busy but sometimes not productive? Snap for that. Snap. A literal snap poll. Do you feel in your life, like in the closet, sometimes stretched too thin at work or at home? Snap for that. Yeah. Do you ever feel like your day is getting hijacked by other people's agenda for you? Snap for that. Well, that's not even funny. I got people dancing to this over here. This is not funny. Okay, now you snapped to all of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so did everybody else. So we're all in the same boat with you, but you're going to help us with this. Describe your life to it. Describe the problem. How many emails do you get a day?
Ooh, now that's a good question.
You don't know the answer?
Probably 50.
50. Anybody get more than 50? People are like, 50.
Yeah, I know.
What an amateur email receiver you are. I am a powerhouse email receiver. I get how many do you get? Who gets 100? Hands up if you get 100. People are still like, 150? 200? 250? What's that? Somebody said something. Now they're going silent. 250, we're down. You see, you can't read 250 emails, can you?
No.
Actually, you can't even read 100. Actually, nobody here is reading 50. Because especially if it's a long email. You know when you get a long email? You just go, you don't read it. You go, am I ever going to read that? No, I'm never going to read that. And I know there's nobody at Guidewire who would send long emails. However thoughtfully they might be written. It was just a hypothetical. So, you receive a lot of emails. Do you feel burdened? Do you feel busy? Do you feel like too much is going on?
Oh, yes.
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 Is it okay? This is no problem, or you think, I'd like to do something about this?
Oh, it's definitely not okay. I would like to
Why
do
is it
something
not okay for you?
Because it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Anybody else relate to this? By the way, snap if you relate to this. Yeah, it's exhausting. You want to do something about it. Tell me your name one more time, I'm sorry.
My name?
Yes.
Joan.
Joan. Help Joan out. Right? This is Operation Help Joan. Intervention. What do we do to help Joan? Give me a more selective question. What can she ask? Because the general question is, Can I do this thing? Could I possibly do it? Well, if I can do it, if there's a way to fit it in, then I suppose I can do it. I should do it. I'll say yes, I'll do it. So ask a more selective question. What can Joan ask to be more selective and thoughtful in what she does in her life? Help me.
Am I the only person who can?
Am I the only person who can do this? If you ask that question on your life, what would it reduce your activity down to? Am I the only person anywhere who can do this job?
Well, it depends on what it is, but I would say maybe a 20% reduction.
20% reduction. Only 20% of the things you're doing, other people could do. Is that true? I love that you laughed. You're the one that said it.
I know.
What's that? She is that good. She's that good. They both said it here. They're helping you out here.
I'm afraid I'm combining more than just work, though. It kind of depends.
No, that's all right. Hey. Is everything we're talking about here at the organizational level also true at the individual level?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it true just professionally, or is it also true personally? More, both. Somebody says both, yes. Of course it is. So we're not talking about a business issue, we're talking about a human issue that also affects every aspect of business because it's all human. But it's also broader than that. So across everything that you're currently doing in your life, you're saying, the only person in the world who can do those 80% is me. Is that what you're saying?
No, we could probably take it down at least 50%, let's say.
Well, that was good.
That's better.
I just pushed a little harder on that, and we went down to 50%.
Of course, a big part of that is just deciding you're not going to do it, right? Which things do you not have to do? That's an important decision.
That's precisely what we're asking.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one question. We're just at one question so far, but it's a good question. Am I really the right person to do this? Or is there somebody else who can do this thing? Am I just doing it because it's already in my closet? Somebody put it in there, they sent me the email, now it's my thing. Is there a better person to do this? Give Joan another question. Go. He said, how much time do you spend on social networking? Like on social networks of any kind, internally, externally, just if you removed all of that, how much would it reduce your time by? There's no way you're going to give an honest answer.
Well, considering I don't even have a Facebook account.
No
it's
Facebook
not really
account.
A big problem.
It's not a big problem for you, but everyone else, I want you to be thinking about the same questions. How much would it reduce it by? Okay, give me one more question to help Joan out. Who put your hand up? Yes. What happens if you don't do it? What she's saying is, she didn't say it, I'm not saying it, but I'm building on it. If you made a list of everything you do, everything that's on your mind to do, everything, like, it takes you an hour probably to write it all out. I did it once, I had 400 items on my list, seriously. So everything just in my head, all that noise in the RAM of my brain, write it all out. And then after every single item, put a question mark. Just, do I have to do this? Do I want to do this still? Or is it just there because it was there from before? From before. This idea, a round of applause for Joan, by the way. This idea of being more selective is key to becoming an essentialist. Instead of just doing all the stuff that comes our way and all that is good, we're looking for the vital few things. Now, I understand that in a services business, you can say, well, this is all very well, this is all very nice, thank you, Greg, but I mean, it's not a closet, right? It's the people that I serve, they want things from me, and that's how it goes. And what I want to say to you is I want to push back to that a little bit right from the beginning. Because yes, of course, we are not, for example, I did not write a book called Noism. Right. It's not about starting to say no to everyone and everything without really thinking about it, any more than saying yes to everyone and everything without really thinking about it. But it is about pausing and starting to negotiate and really making a shift. In fact, we talked about Steve Jobs earlier on, and in a way I feel it's overdone. So I prefer a story about someone who said no to Steve Jobs and lived to tell the tale. In fact, someone in a professional services relationship with him. So after he's been fired from Apple, he starts the company Next, and he's in the new company. He wants a great logo. He goes to one of the top logoists in the country, Paul Rand. He says, Rand, we'd like you to design for me a logo. I want a great logo. And he explained how it was all going to be. You're going to bring me loads of options, and I'm going to tell you which I hate and which I like, and we're going to go through this process. And Paul Rand listens to all of this, and finally he says, no. I will solve your problem for you, and you will pay me, and that's how it works. Steve said of that experience, that surprised me, but I sensed he knew what he was doing. He had the credibility with me that I said, okay, we'll do it your way. He said, he brought me a jewel of a logo. That's the logo they used. And then he added this most important insight. He said, Paul Rand was the ultimate professional. Really? Is that what you would describe or think of as the ultimate professional? Coming from arguably one of the more critical leaders that we've seen? The ultimate professional. Why was the ultimate professional? He said he's the ultimate professional because he thought through how to create value for me more deeply than I had. That's key. And that's how you apply this process to professional services. You have to explore the issues more deeply than the client understands them. That's where the credibility comes from. But then you eliminate of those options the things that you think are not going to be valuable. Now you don't just do it, say no without thinking about it, like I just said, but you negotiate with them. You push back. Why? Because you're interested in their breakthrough success. You want their success to look like this. Breakthrough. You're as interested and committed to that as they are, maybe more thoughtful than they are. That's how you can shift from being an order taker, an order taker to a trusted advisor. An essentialist is constantly curious and interested in how to break through to the highest point of contribution. That's what this represents. The highest point of contribution. And in order to do that, we simply can't say yes or no without thinking about it. You have to move into a third option, which is to negotiate, to discuss, even to debate in the very best sense of that term. To be able to have a discussion so that you can actually make wise strategic trade-offs. I was thinking about this comment earlier on about the personal, and I wasn't going to share it, but there's a personal experience in my life that both may apply to somebody here personally, but also it's a symbolic story for these kinds of discussions and negotiations. So it's more broadly applicable too, and I want to share it with you. It was when I got an email from my boss at the time. It said, Friday between 1 and 2 would be a very bad time for your wife to have a baby. I mean, my wife was expecting, otherwise even weirder email to receive. And Thursday night comes, we're in the hospital, daughter's born in the early, sort of late Thursday night, early hours of the Friday morning. We're still in the hospital Friday. And I'm feeling torn. How can I keep everybody happy? How can I straddle it? Keep all these different people. I got to keep everybody happy. Try and do it all. I went to the meeting. Afterwards, I remember they said, the client will respect you for the choice you just made. I don't know that the look on their faces evinced that sort of confidence. But even if they did, everyone here knows that I made a fool's bargain. That I'm trying to answer the wrong question. Not how do I fit it all in, but what's the most valuable thing to do? What's essential? What's essential? I learned from that experience the simplest of lessons, which is this. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Now that's the personal. But the ethic and principle of less but better, the idea of being an essentialist is true personally, it's true professionally, and it's true organizationally. It can apply at all these levels. And in fact, I want to go even further up the human system, not just personal or professional or team or organizational. You could go all the way to societal. It would be the same principle. The same principle. In fact, I started today with almost started this conversation about almost becoming a barrister in England, a lawyer. Now I didn't. I want to wrap up our conversation in this main session here with a story of someone who did become a barrister and might have stayed a barrister in London, England, but had a family emergency come up in South Africa. So he travels to South Africa, and when he's there, he takes the train. And he's in first class, Englishman, first class. That's how he liked it. But someone comes to him, the porter comes to him and says, you can't be in first class, you have to leave. It's in the middle of apartheid still, and he's not permitted to be there. And it's one of these defining moments for him, and he says, well, of course I can be here. I bought the ticket, I'm an Englishman, I get to be here. They said, no, and he won't leave, but they throw him right off the train. It becomes a defining moment. I'm going to take on the South African government. And he does. It takes him some 23 years of living in the Phoenix settlement, and he finds that after all that time, including going to jail along the way, I might add, he is successful. His moment of clarity has taken a while, but it has led to success. And the success breeds new options and opportunities. He goes back to India, where they've been reading about this great quest all through these years, and they say, meet him at the train station. They say, we want you to run for public office. And he, I suppose, must have thought, what a great compliment. They're all here, the masses. I mean, that doesn't happen to everybody. And I think if he'd just been a non-essentialist, he'd have just said yes to that. But he negotiated too. He explored. He explored. He said no. He said, look, I've got to. He says, I don't understand how it's possible that so few British can control so many Indians so effortlessly. And if you put me now in a position of political power, I won't know then any better than I know now. What a shocking thing it would to have people in political positions who don't understand the system. So he takes 1 year of his life to travel across India. He's in the paddy fields with the poor. He's trying to understand the whole system. He's exploring what is essential. And he finds the answer eventually. Something so simple, so small, infinitesimally small, infinitely important. The answer was salt. Salt of all things. Because the British controlled the production of salt, they controlled the production of bread and the whole food chain. And so from that insight came the idea to make salt on the beaches. It became known as the Salt March because some 600,000 people follow him as he walks across India in this demonstration of civil disobedience. We're talking, of course, about Gandhi, and most people know the story, the general story of Gandhi, but almost nobody knows of a family circumstance he had that came up. In the midst of all these civil disobedience, all this public work that he's doing, his grandson is still living in South Africa and gets beaten up by a gang for being too black. And then later is beaten up again by a different gang for being too white. Furious, angry, as a teenager could possibly be. His grandfather has enough sense and discernment about what is essential to say, you just come and live with me for a while. So he sends him, has him come, lives with him. I interviewed his grandson. His name is Aaron Gandhi. And Aaron Gandhi told me that his grandfather made space to listen to him an hour a day for a year and a half. Just listening. And that is a disciplined pursuit. And a disciplined pursuit of what is essential. And I think it illustrates the idea that being an essentialist is something that's first personal, then professional, then leadership. It grows out of a deep conviction that most stuff is non-essential. And a few things really, really matter. And because that is true, it justifies the exploration it takes to actually figure out what matters. If everything was all about the same importance, well, it's just like shoveling coal. You might as well just shovel as much as you can. But what if suddenly you discover that life and leadership is about finding diamonds? You're in a diamond mine. It's about finding those things that are most precious, most valuable. That would justify a whole different approach. You'd be exploring differently. And that's exactly the idea. Essentialists believe that almost everything is non-essential and a few things only are truly valuable. Non-essentialists believe just exactly the opposite, that almost everything is equally important, almost everything's essential. All has to be done because it's all essential. And that's the distinction from a mindset point of view. And that's just what we want to see as we tie all this together, is not this. You don't come to this conversation and go, yeah. People actually say this to me sometimes. They say, yeah, I think I got it. This is like one more thing I need to do. And I'm always like, no, that is not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying there's a different way of thinking about everything. And if you become an essentialist, eventually your life will be consumed with essential purpose. Those things that are very important can be the things you spend time with forever. It can be done. Not easily, not immediately, but it can be done. In fact, the word priority itself is instructive in this pursuit of being an essentialist. The word priority came into the English language in the 1400s singular. Priority, how many? One. What does the word even mean? Prior, the priorist thing. According to Peter Drucker, it stayed singular for the next 500 years. I mean, for half a millennium, nobody in the English-speaking language went to a meeting and said, here are my 25 priorities. And even now when we do it, what does it mean? These all have to be done now. In fact, yesterday. It's a sort of madness in non-essentialism. Essentialism sounds mad when you first hear it, but eventually you realize, no, it's non-essentialism that's crazy. Essentialism is sane. As you keep pursuing that question, what is essential, and you explore it, and you find it, and you eliminate other things, and delegate other things, so you can focus more and more on what really matters, your contribution goes up massively. Your stress can go down, and your contribution goes up. What happened to Gandhi? A quintessential essentialist, not only in the family domain as we just described, but also in his public work. I mean, do we believe for a second that he would have brought independence to the largest democracy in the world if he just tried to do it all? He's just going to do everything that everyone else is doing. Do we believe it? When Gandhi died, the U.S. Secretary of State at the time was General George Marshall, who said of Gandhi, he said, here is a man who has shown that simplicity and clarity are more powerful than empires. And Einstein said of Gandhi, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth. I was in South Africa, went to the Phoenix settlement, went to the house where he lived for those 23 years, was given a poem. I was told it was the only poem he ever wrote. And in that poem, was not exactly surprised to find the succinctest summary of essentialism I have found anywhere. These 4 words, reducing oneself to zero. The idea is that eventually we become something we weren't before. We become an essentialist, consumed with purpose, consumed with unique purpose, and that we carry that purpose into the work that we do. and that we negotiate and discuss with our customers, with our clients, with our team, what really matters so that we can give ourselves to those things that matter. To those things that matter. That matters. That is essential. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
May this start a conversation with all of us. And we have a couple of ways to explore and go deeper. First of which, Greg is going to be joining us in a breakout session in Baltimore 3. So directly after, or when the breakouts begin at 3:30. At 3:30, when the breakouts begin, make a left, Baltimore 3. You can interact directly with Greg. Second thing, on your seats, you have the 21-day challenge. Grab that, take it with you, try it, see if it works. And then the third way, if you're interested in the book, Essentialism, you can purchase a copy, absolutely no obligation, but if you're interested, there is a bookseller down the hallway. You can grab a copy of it, and Greg is going to be there at the table to personally sign it for you. Thank you for your time.